lack of education, trauma, and as Dr. Benjamin said, mental health. We do not address trauma. A few of the cases that Professor Van As put up there, a security guard, family murder, police, etc., that's trauma. That is what we need to be addressing. And by focusing our efforts on the legal gun owners, we are not addressing the problem at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Skuman. Please, this is your opportunity, lady at the back.
I'm Valdi van Renen-Leroux. I'm the director of the Trauma Center for Survivors of Violence and Torture. And like Dr. Lane Benjamin, our organization works with learners and adults who have been affected by gang violence, and more specifically, gun violence. My question to Professor Van As, the statistics that you provide, I'm assuming that it is for physical injury, and I'm wondering whether there is any statistics that speak to children who have accessed health facilities specifically for mental health. And then my question to Mr. Block is with regard to White Paper 6 on inclusive education, and it speaks to the right of learners to education, and I would see gun violence, and in particular gang violence, as forming part of psychosocial disabilities, given the effect that it has on the learners' rights to education. And I'm just wondering whether there is any research that has been done that is looking at the rights of children who are affected by psychosocial disabilities of this particular nature in South Africa.
Thank you. I'll acknowledge one more hand. Wasn't yours. This gentleman's over here. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Tebogo Kwape. I represent the Sports Shooters Forum. I just want to initially thank Dr. Benjamin for dealing really with what she specializes in, and giving me a closer understanding, an intimate understanding of what the issues and the problems in her areas of expertise are. I would presume that as a medical professional, I think the most important thing would be to, when a patient walks into your rooms, you diagnose a problem to be able to arrive at the correct solution to that problem, to that diagnosis. And that if you do not diagnose a medical problem correctly, you are not going to resolve anything. And I would presume that, and without trying to attack anyone, but trying to bring clarity to where I'm coming from, that Professor Van As would understand that if you venture into a social problem like we have and misdiagnose it and hope that there would be a resolution of that problem and we misdiagnose it, the potential pitfalls that we will have if you do that. I've listened to you and I've heard you talk about your medical experience in respect of the wounds that you've seen in hospitals and all that. All I've heard basically is gunshot wounds, kids dying, guns bad, and all that. I didn't really pick up your knife inflicted wounds, the most severe variety of wounds that you should have experienced as a professor and a doctor in a normal South African hospital. Now, after that, I heard you talk about solutions to that problem.
Question, please.
I'll get to that problem. I'll try to be quick. And that the Firearms Control Act would actually be a solution to that. Have you familiarized yourself properly with the problems that we have in South Africa? Have you familiarized yourself with the implications of each and every specific amendments that has been sought in that act?
Thank you. Mic off, please. Can I give it to the panel?
Maybe I can start talking about knives. There's no doubt that knives are also a very important reason for violence in our society. I've been talking, as I mentioned several times, only in children under the age of 12. So I think that's the difference. So the people who attack each other, they are teenagers, adolescents. So they are not, knife fights very rarely occur under the age of 12. So we do see them, but none of them is as serious as gunshots. Gunshots, the knife wounds very seldom cause permanent damage, for instance paralysis and things like, or death, while gunshots very often do, because of the mechanisms I've explained. So that is my answer on the knife question.
Okay. Do you want to say anything about the? You don't have to. About your recommendation, or just leave it at that, because it's not really to discuss the amendment to the act.
No,
okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Let me just speak before Leila. Just to say that I think firstly schools can do some things but not all things, and maybe that's the lesson. They can provide role models, they can ban violence and respect their kids, they can prevent bullying, but they can't do everything. If you were a kid, why would you not join a gang? Quite frankly, you've got half a chance of getting to matric, and even if you get to matric, do you get beyond matric? Do you pass matric? So, I mean, a gang gives you respect, it gives you all the things that Leila has spoken about, and it gives you a gun as well. You may have to kill your mother, but I mean, that's beside the point. That's the additional thing that we look at. So I think Leila is right, that it's a multifaceted issue we need to look at. It's gangs, it's education, it's trauma, it's mental health, and it's knives and guns. So I think that knives just says that maybe knives are a problem, but also guns are a problem. So I'm happy that we're tackling one of the issues.
Do you want to say anything about poverty? Poverty being supposedly a factor in violence and causing people to...
I was just asked about poverty and inequality.
Lack of education.
And I think that that we know that if you go to, if you live in a lousy area, you get lousy schools. And we know that if you get to university, you've got a chance of getting through, or maybe not, depending on where you live, whether you live in Khayelitsha or Claremont. It does make a difference. And the students who are opposed to roads are not from Cape Town, actually. Because if you're from Cape Town, you don't get into UCT. So I think that poverty and inequality is a big issue that we have to address. All of those issues we need to address as a nation.
Is it a cause of people being violent then?
Is it a cause of people being violent? It seems to be. Let Leila deal with that.
Okay, thanks, Graham.
I think just to add to that, I think just through kind of working a bit with UCT, Stellenbosch and UWC, a lot of the students, the new generation of students that we're dealing with are also pretty traumatized because ultimately it comes down to families breaking down, and that happens across the board as well. So even, your medical students at UCT, a lot of them are sitting with trauma as well. So I just want to reinforce that, yes, it is geographically skewed, but it does affect everyone. It's not just a problem out there on the Cape Flats. And I think part of our lack of ability to deal with it in this country is because we are all affected by it. And in the same way that a 10-year-old boy disconnects, I think we also disconnect from it because we don't want to deal with it. And that we need to look at.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to you. We're going to go on lunch now till 2:15. We will have the next panel up at 2:15. Remember, if you're sitting with a burning question or contribution or statement to make, either take it up with the panelist over lunch, or we will address that during the outcome session after tea. I thank you, and I thank you for your graciousness and leadership thus far. Thanks, bye-bye. That wasn't a bye-bye, it was go and enjoy lunch. Be focusing on going forward. Is that okay? So you've got half an hour, the floor is yours. Please, identify yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Audrey Kitself and I'm representing the Hunters Forum. In other words, I'm representing together with Stephen Paulos here all the accredited hunting associations and the thousands and thousands of members. Regarding the last session, with the topic impact of gun culture on society, I want to thank, and we want to thank Dr. Benjamin for her presentation, because I think that has clearly indicated that it's rather the impact of societal problems and the product of crime on our society than the impact of gun culture. But I've got 2 or 3 questions. Professor van As has referred to when the 1 million firearm licenses were issued after a long backlog. I want to ask Professor van As if he is still around, whether he has actually done research on any other reason, because it couldn't have been because of the backlog. Because while the renewal, there was a backlog of renewals, we all still had valid firearms and no firearms were withdrawn or taken back. So what could the other reason be, or whether he's done research on exactly what that was, because it definitely cannot be subscribed to the backlog. The second thing is age. He's also asked for age to be increased from 21 to 25. I'm also asking the question, on what basis? Does that mean that from the outcome of his studies or research, that all those crimes take place with somebody between the ages of 21 and 24? Because purely saying that somebody is more adult at 25 certainly does not correlate to his concerns that he's raised during his presentation. Then the last remark that I want to make, and that's a remark, it's not a question, was that it was said that children growing up in a household with guns will use the gun one day. Now that is exactly showing that from the different angles that one can look at the impact of the gun culture on our society, because from our side, where we sit, if I grow up in a house where there's a gun, then I will learn to use it responsibly one day. So please, just we need to look at both sides of it and not only at the negative. Thanks.
Thanks, Audrey. And maybe others who feel strongly about a point also can answer and respond out of your own work and your own constituency. Attorney Hood.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. You got it right. I just want to take up something with Dr. van As as well. I'm interested in scientific research, Dr. van As. I'm not interested in conclusions that state what somebody thinks. That's a very important distinction. One of your slides, which is entitled Suicides with Legal Guns, you have a statement, and I'm going to quote it. 80% of these double murders could have been prevented. I'd like to know where you get that statistic from and how that conclusion is reached, please.
Thank you, sir. The Honourable Kola Barnard.
I also have a question. I did ask the Professor after the last session, but let's ask it again in the full forum. The Professor said at the outset of his address that firearms were the leading killer in South Africa. That's what I heard, that's what I typed down. I looked at the Stats SA figures for 2013. Of the 5,019 unnatural deaths, 85 were by firearm discharge, and that includes SAPS members and civilians who are shooting for self-defense. And there were 4,270 sharp object deaths, 85%. So I asked him to justify that claim. He then said actually he meant in the year 2000. I have yet to look back at the year 2000. It may well be that at that stage firearms were the leading killer. I can't substantiate that. I have yet to look at the Stats SA figures, but it came across very clearly where his stand was that firearms are the leading killer, and they most certainly are not by a very, very, very long shot. In fact, this entire exercise should probably be about the knifings and basic sharp implement murders. Thank you.
Okay, is there any other views? Mr. Choke, and then we'll go to the Honourable.
Good afternoon. My name is Manabela Chauke from Sira. My questions are directed at Dr. Benjamin. I think Dr. Benjamin gave a very comprehensive kind of findings in terms of how society get enrolled in this violence, and most in particular the use of the phrase incubated in terror. What I want to find out from the doctor is that you've asked the question that we need to find ways in which to disarm the minds of people living in these traumatic societies. Now, what can be done, in your opinion, to sort of reverse this snowball? Secondly, given your findings, what is it that can be used to influence legislation, particularly around those findings, for us to be able to resolve this issue of violence within society? Thank you.
Please, ma'am.
Thank you, Chair. The gun-free zones, it has been a problem. My question is to Professor Van As. To the implementation of these gun-free zones, especially in places like schools and hospitals where there's no drop-off area of the firearms. What is your suggestion on this? My second one, I just want to be controversial here. When our small boys grow up, we buy them guns and they start doing ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, and they feel like heroes and they go on and on and on. And this one goes to Dr. Benjamin. To what extent does this influence these young boys to want to utilize the real firearm? Thanks, Chair.
Okay, can we have some of our panelists respond? The Honourable Bjerkman also has something to say, and anybody else who feels that they want to contribute, not just ask the question, but actually facilitate some of the debate and discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think one of the issues that came very sharply into the focus this morning, after this morning's discussion, is what I would call the data gap. And maybe just to get a view from the NGOs as well as the universities and research institutions. What would be the advice to the Portfolio Committee going forward, that we get a comprehensive universum of what is the state of, what is the statistical situation of guns, illegal guns, the SADC situation, because I think a lack of qualitative research is going to be problematic for us to maybe reach certain solutions. So maybe just to get some comments from their side. The Secretariat, I think, indicated that they're going to focus very much now on research in that area. But what can be done more to ensure that we've got really statistics that can stood the test of time and also the test of time? Thanks.
Before I go to the other hands, let me just ask Professor Van As and Dr. Benjamin if they're willing to say anything at this time to either further clarify what you've said or...
Sebastian Van As from Red Cross. I indeed said that in the last few years we've seen a massive increase in children presenting to the hospital with firearm-related injuries. Now, of course, you can discuss what is the cause of that, but it is extremely suspicious if the level has been going down since 2000 and since the year 2000, when the new firearm bill was started, and it went down all the way to 2010, and suddenly it's going up. And the only different thing is that in that time, 1 million licenses were issued. So we are aware of that. It's a police statistic. So I think there must be a direct correlation. It's not only at Red Cross. I spoke to all the surgeons, all the trauma surgeons in the Trauma Society. We've all seen an increase in the last 3 years. So in my mind, this is the only reason it could be. Because we know that the new firearm bill was very effective in 2010 when it was implemented to reducing the number of firearms. The question about why I want the minimum age increase from 21 to 25 is it's very clear. If you look in the world, who are the most violent people? They are young people. The average age in any country, the perpetrators of rape, perpetrators of murder, they are 20-year-old boys. So it's a matter of fact that they've got big bodies, their brain is not yet fully matured, and it's a very dangerous cocktail, and they are not controlling all their activities. And this is even to the level, and I'm sure Advocate Arends can maybe back me up here, but internationally there are discussions to have justice for child justice to raise that minimum age from 18, or that age from 18 to 25, because it's actually unfair to put someone in jail for the rest of his life if you know that his brain was not really mature. Anyway, we know all accidents, car accidents, all the violence, these are committed by young people, and I think if the majority of violent acts go together with a firearm, I think that preventing young people from having a firearm, you can prevent a lot of violence.
Dr. Benjamin?
Okay. Just in response to the question about how to disarm the minds, and at the risk of you all rolling your eyes at me, I mean, at the very heart of it is really about teaching people respect for themselves and for others. And I think the solutions are actually, and I don't know if it's because I've been doing this for a long time, but they're pretty common sense and fairly straightforward. It is about humanity, respect, family, safety. But I think it's hard for people to implement and to be consistent about it because we sit with our own baggage. And we are defensive about our own area of power and finance and whatever it is. And I think we have to address that. So, you know, for example, working with teachers, training teachers and helping them understand why children can't learn in violent environments. At the end of it, teachers consistently come out and say, I'm looking at this child like a human being now. I didn't realize I was traumatized as well. I need to work on myself. And that's across the board, working with police as well. You know, people are affected and need to get back in touch with addressing that and confronting that, and not just blindly carrying on with their lives, taking power and control in ways that are destructive to other people. And we see that in every sector of our society through, you know, the protests, how we bring down foreign nationals and our xenophobia. We look for someone else that we can take control of. And we can only stop doing that through addressing our own issues of power and control, which is often taken away by trauma. And I've got lots of, I mean, I have many thoughts, and I've spoken to various people, experts in different sectors around education, around health, around you know, correctional services. There are lots of things that we can do, but at the heart of it, again, it's about taking responsibility for yourself as a human being and how you treat the next person. And we can teach that and show that and emulate that. And the work that we do in Nova Park is about developing healthy citizens that are role models to others. So I shared an example with someone during lunch where we had, you know, an ex-gangster who was a drug dealer, who was in and out of gangs for 3 years, or 3 years in our program as well. But his 14-year-old brother was shot 3 times and survived. That probably thanks to Professor Van Us. But the gangsters came to him with a gun and said, here, we'll go finish the job. We knew who did it. Come with us. And in that moment, he had to decide which path to follow. And because there was another man, a role model in the community, he decided to go to that person's house. And that man in the community talked him down. And he decided not to go and kill, and is now a role model to his younger brother. But it's having people on the community level that we can build up as role models and make more visible. As far as influence legislation, I mean, I haven't read all the bits of papers and acts and all of this, so I'm not going to talk beyond my expertise. I'll leave that to the rest of you. But I think, you know, on a very basic level, it's things looking at what is resulting in arms and weapons and drugs being trafficked into communities. So we need to look at our borders, our porous borders, and within the policing system. And again, it's illegal guns, so there's no research. I mean, the only research I could find was something like 500,000 to 4 million illegal guns in society. So that doesn't really tell you anything. And you can't research something that doesn't exist. So all I have is the word on the street and the word on the community, which is that for community members, their mistrust in criminal justice's processes fuels that situation because you can't control it. So we need to address it and hold people accountable and not be afraid to hold people to account within our own professions as well. So, I mean, I could go on and on for days, but I'll stop there.
Thank you. Please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I've been rescued to some extent by yourself by allowing us to comment rather than to ask questions only.
If you ever need more rescuing, please come my way.
Thank you so much for your kind assistance. First of all, with regards to Mr. Beekman's question pertaining to research, this is a topic that has been worrying us for quite some time, that more often than not we find research is very much goal-orientated from the person who mandated the researcher. We would like to see more objective research. And for that reason, those people who have studied to become researchers, who are qualified to be researchers, we value the service that they render, but more often than not we find that that particular service, that research study, is subjectively inclined and it serves very little purpose. And unfortunately we have also found that those people seem to underestimate the intelligence of Parliament and parliamentary committees. They believe that if they can sell that type of rubbish to the parliamentary committee, the committee will just accept it because they are a professor or a researcher or whatever the case may be. And a very good example in this regard is what Professor Van Us, as this morning said, or just before lunch said, with regards to the research that he has done. Whilst we do not doubt for one moment the tragedy of every single child who is killed or injured in any form of violence, or any person for that matter, but specifically children, whilst we value that, to sensationalize the matter by showing that on the transparencies on a board, that does not help anything in the first instance. We're adults. We have a clear understanding of that in the first instance. To make blunt, unsubstantiated statements, like for instance, a person who is brought up in a house with firearms is prone to get violent, which is totally untrue. There are numerous examples where one can clearly indicate that not to be the case. A question was raised earlier on, it was given by Professor Van Us as well, the trauma that a person undergoes after having shot a person, which certainly is true. But what people seldom think of is that in the first instance, if you use a firearm or any weapon for that matter, in a legitimate self-defense situation, the first thing that one should do is to celebrate success, to celebrate that you are alive, to celebrate that you have succeeded in thwarting an unlawful and violent attack. That is reality, sir. And that is what one must bear in mind at all times. So everything turns around the question that Mr. Beekman has asked with regards to research. And from the NGO's side, and I'm quite certain that my colleagues from Gun-Free South Africa wholeheartedly agree with that, and that is we need better research, we need more objective studies and analysis of the research work to be done, so that Parliament, and specifically the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Police, could be better informed in guiding the country into a specific direction in order to ensure that we have a safe environment in which our children can grow up. Thank you, Chair.
So let me do my facilitator little hat and bit here and reframe what you said, Mr. Walsh, and that was simply that we need better data sets. All research is done with very specific interest in mind. So is your contributions. It comes from a specific place with a very specific interest. We need to understand and declare that interest, and it's useful to know from whence it comes. And you're reminding us about that. And that titles per se doesn't necessarily make the research valid or otherwise. Because I want to refrain from casting dispersions on persons particularly. Right? This is not the forum nor the place. What we've invited ourselves to do is exercise leadership and have a dialogue. And in this discourse, we shall do so respectfully and mindfully, that we need to retain the very dignity of everybody in this house. And short of that, you're pretty much free to say what you want. What we want you to do is declare your own interest. Because we are all speaking from our own subjective interest base and our own very particular constituency. And we hope today to foster understanding of each other's positions and where we may be differing and where we may be agreeing, so that we can use the best that this time can allow us. So thank you for that, Mr. Walsh, and thank you for allowing me to reframe you. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve Palos from the Hunters Forum, representing the Hunters Association, as Audrey mentioned earlier on. The answer to the Honourable Mr. Beekman's question about where should the proper research come from perhaps sits in the Secretary of Police's Act, where in under 6F, I think it is, 6.1F, conduct or cause to be conducted any research as it may deem necessary, is one of the functions that the Secretariat has. And I would propose that the correct way to go about that, to ensure that there is buy-in from all stakeholders, is that the Secretary does that along with the partnerships we already have established with the Secretariat over many years. We have come to many of the meetings that the previous Secretary has called regarding legislation, etc., and we have always stretched out our hand as the firearm community to assist and engage, and there's been some of it where it's complete stakeholder involvement, which includes parties from the anti-gun lobby as well. And I don't think it would be very difficult to put together a committee to oversee what kind of research is required, and to find research that is then done in a manner that everyone can buy into, under the guidance of the Secretary and answerable to the Portfolio Committee.
Thank you, Steve. If I've acknowledged you, please feel free to speak, and then I'll go up the way.
Thank you, Chair. Unbeknownst to me, he exactly said what I wanted to, and that is that I think what we should do is do research and then hand it to the opposite party for peer review, and then have a discussion. Why did you say this? Where do you get these numbers from? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please.
Okay, I think I'm at the back. I think that it's Graham Bloch speaking. I think that obviously research is problematic, and obviously, secondly, all should work together, whether it's Department of Social Development, Department of Basic Education, Health, or the subs. So obviously we need people to work together, but I would hate to see guns being left in the community just because we're worried about research. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Graham. I acknowledge the gentleman sitting next to Mr. Walsh. Martin.
I think just one point that that is perhaps worth considering when the research is undertaken is there are a number of commentators, including here in South Africa, and people who are not aligned with either of the parties who are suggesting that there's clearly a relationship between illegal firearms and crime, but the relationship may be in part inverse, which is to suggest that it is crime that is driving a demand for illegal firearms, in as much as many people at the lower income levels of society are seeking to source and obtain illegal firearms primarily for purposes of self-defense. And I think that that is something we need to look into and to get a better idea and understanding of, and how that dynamic operates as well. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence around it, and it's a very real factor that needs to be considered. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. My name is Fred Kamfer, and I represent the South African Hunters and Game Conservation Association. I would like to just make a comment in the sense that I believe that Dr. Benjamin sitting next to me most probably put the finger right on the spot, in my view. We allowed a society to develop in this country that has very little, if any, respect for law and order, rules and regulations. Whether it is the taxi driver that, in that part of the world that I come from, is not prepared to ride in a convoy, as they call it, but slip to the left of the queue in front of him, go right to the front of the robot and then push in, or whether it's the people in Letlabile and Brits that get upset because they don't have water in their houses, which I understand, but then go and burn down a school because they're upset, or whether it's people that revert to violence in any way. I believe the cause of the problem is a lack of respect for other people, a lack of respect for law and order. And that is where we should find the cause of all of these things that we address with. If we want to remove guns from society, we should just as well remove used tires from society, and we should just as well remove rocks and bricks from society. We should, if we want to start fixing the cause of the problems, we should look at what has gone wrong in society, that we do not respect people anymore, that we do not have respect for law and order. And this, I believe, Dr. Benjamin put on the table and identified it to us. I would like to applaud her for doing so, because that's going back to the root cause of the problems that we have. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. This part of the House has been yucky, 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 yucky. No, nobody on this side of the House wants to talk? Mr. Hood, you're on the next panel. You can speak from here and say what you want. Don't worry, we have this relationship. Don't worry, Dr. Kolobana. We've spoken. Two of us. Yes, man. Not I from means. You lost. Please. Those two, and then you'll be lost. Please.
Thank you. I'm Sami van Graan, CEO of Business Against Crime South Africa. Our view on this issue is yes, we understand that the study is going to take quite some time, but it's quite imperative. And from the discussions we've heard this morning, there's quite a lot of valuable input in this room, which needs to be coordinated. And in order for the study to be successful, I think it needs to be properly scoped. And the desired output needs to be clear, and that's not coming through for me at this point in time. And yes, we have a wonderful piece of legislation, but it goes far beyond just firearms control. The issue that hasn't come out is the role that the criminal justice system plays in effectively removing firearms from society. And therefore, the study needs to include the functionalities of the criminal justice system in supporting the existing legislation and the rollout of that legislation. And therefore, it's not just about statistics. Statistics do play a role, but I think sometimes we place too much of emphasis on numbers and lose the plot completely. So the study should focus on really trying to understand the environment and the whole value chain across that environment before we can even start talking about developing strategy. And that is basically the way BAC works, and that's our input.
Thank you. Three people, Professor Van As, Attorney Hood, and General Sithole, and then we'll call up the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to respond to Advocate John Wells, who starts to doubt that my statistics were right. I would like to ask him to go into the scientific literature and then look in the South African Journal of Surgery, and he'll find a publication indicating that exactly the numbers I gave this morning. I quoted several studies, but the main thrust of my presentation was a simple thing: the number of children coming each year to the Red Cross Children's Hospital with gunshots. There was a significant increase to the year 2000. After the law was implemented, there was a significant decrease of about 70%. And since the release of 1 million or more than 1 million gun licenses, it has gone up again. Not only at the Red Cross, also at Grutsker, also at Tygerberg, and through the whole country. So that's independent research. Yeah? It's not colored by anything. It's just counting the children coming with gunshots to the hospital. So I just want to state it categorically. Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney Martin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. A couple of comments. I think we need to just take a step back for a few moments. I think Business Against Crime over there picked up to a certain extent on what I'm going to say, and that is, if we're going to deal with the problems with guns, it's not only about guns. We need to broaden the scope of our investigation, and I would particularly like to include, which I think somebody here alluded to earlier today, what the causes of the ills are in our society. And we must certainly look at the prevalence of the abuse of drugs and alcohol as well. So we can't just come up with a solution that focuses on firearms. We must focus more broadly on a solution that deals with violence and crime in our communities. You're not off the hook, Dr. Van As, because you didn't answer my question, and I think it's fair to conclude in the circumstances that if you're asked a question and to give an answer where you came to a conclusion and your scientific data for that, if you can't, then it's taken that you, if you don't answer it, it's taken that you can't. And you didn't answer my question. And I know that you've asked, Mr. Chair, that we must engage and not be too personal, etc. But the difficulty that I have here is that you have information that's circulated, particularly to the Portfolio Committee, that is scientifically flawed. And that is why we're having the same debate today, 12 years after the Firearms Control Act was first debated in Parliament, with the same flawed data from the same source. And I just want to give you one other example. What the conclusion should be from Dr. Van As's so-called data is that injuries to children, which are increasing, means that we have more crime in society. There is no direct correlation to the number of firearm licenses granted. The fact is that more children are being shot. We should be asking, are those shooting incidents with unlicensed or illegal firearms? Are they with legal firearms? And we don't have any of that data. And it shows how lacking in data we have to try and deal with these issues. Because if there's a problem in the Western Cape where people are being killed or children are being tragically shot, we've got to ask ourselves, where are those firearms coming from, first of all, before you turn around and say, raise the age of the right to the competency, etc. You can't just say because there's more injuries, guns are bad. There's a flaw in that reasoning. So I reiterate, in support of what Mr. Beekman has said, let's get a foundation for research. Let's get the scope established as Business Against Crime has suggested. And I will address on the panel the issue of the criminal justice system, because there's some pretty serious problems in that as well.
Thank you. General Sithole.
Yeah, Chairperson, thank you. I would just talk on three things in brief. Acknowledging the research and as outlined by the panels. What I just like to bring in is modus operandi analysis and research. I think it's not coming out very clear, but we're talking change of legislations, we're talking gaps. You will never experience them unless there's a change of modus operandi by the criminal. And most of what informs our discussion is new invention in the modus operandi environment. The criminal always finds something new, and then we start dancing towards that. Now, all I'm suggesting that if these studies could escalate to modus operandi analysis and research, can we begin to know what is the criminal up to? Believe me, they're gonna be researching what we're dealing with today, the outcome of the workshop, starting from tomorrow, and they will invent a new modus operandi. Secondly, I wanted also, in support of what BAC has put on, maybe if we could also escalate the studies to root cause analysis. I think when we talk to root cause analysis, there's this question, why is our society so violent? Why would they commit robbery, snatch the bag, take the money, shoot and kill you after they've got what they wanted? So I think these studies, they also need to confront our societal dynamics and begin to link that to combating. I think one of the researchers talked to like the impact of Operation Sutunya. We appreciate that it has been acknowledged, but we want to put it forward. It was a stabilization intervention. It was supposed to be followed by normalization interventions. And when we also do the studies, most of the studies, they end at stabilization, they don't escalate to normalization. And normalization take us to multidisciplinary collaboration and sustainability of the impact. Otherwise, what we do then tend to be fire extinguishing. At the present moment, I'm not suggesting that researchers don't do it. I'm suggesting that maybe if the studies could escalate, expand, extend to covering that. The last one is hotspot analysis. I think when there's a hotspot on crimes related to firearms, believe me, there's other crimes that influence the hotspots. And you might even find that if the crimes that are firearm related, they are secondary crimes to the main crime that the criminal is up to in that particular area, environment. And one example of that, you can have a house robbery. A house robbery is the most serious and dangerous crime that is still feared to the community. But the criminals will just execute house robbery when they are looking for a firearm as a resource to go and commit a heist. So it's a secondary, very dangerous crime. But then if we also do hotspot analysis and further analysis on unpacking those particular crimes, then we may find. We are doing it from the police, but we also want to work together with the researchers. Thank you, Chair.
Well, there's an invitation from everybody to work with everybody. What I will do and attempt to do later is to collate and summarize and see what broad thematic areas are emerging. For now, though, I want to give over to the panel. So if we could invite Adele, Norman, and who else is on the panel? There's three of you. Oh. Okay, I promise I'll let him off the hook after this. I promise that.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adele Kirsten. I work with an organization called Gun Free South Africa, and I've worked in the field of small arms control since the early 90s. And a particular good afternoon to the honourable members. I want to thank the Civilian Secretariat, as well and particularly the Portfolio Committee on Police, for inviting Gun Free South Africa to be part of these discussions. I think it was quite a bold decision and move to bring all of us together in the room and to try and grapple with what are some of the solutions. What do we know that works? What are we doing wrong? What are we doing that we keep on repeating and there's no evidence to suggest that it works? And what else should we be doing? So, starting, I want to say, because there's been a lot of discussion about, it's not just about the guns, it's part of a broader context. And to acknowledge that. But this specific focus is around firearms, so we are narrowing by the very nature of what we're discussing. And the topic for this panel is strategies to reduce the circulation of illegal guns. And so my focus will be narrow. It will be specifically on how do we do that? What are the things that we know works? So I guess in a way just to acknowledge that, and yet to acknowledge that we understand that firearms violence is one part of the violence in this country. But it's a significant part, and that's why it requires this kind of attention. So I'm going to focus on 3 strategies to reduce the circulation of illegal guns in South Africa. And they are interdependent, and they speak to each other. It's preventing diversion, mopping up the illegal pool, and closing the leaking tap. So although the focus is on the weapon and how to improve our controls over it and to prevent its misuse, I believe for many of us in this room, and in particular for Gun Free South Africa, the reason we're here, the primary focus is not about the weapon. It's about the people. It's about making sure that we reduce gun violence and that we reduce the number of people affected by gun death and injury. And that's my vested interest and Gun Free's vested interest. That's why we're part of this conversation. And I will show, in looking at the 3 intervention strategies, it will become obvious about the link between the legal trade and the illegal trade. And for people who survive gunshots, and for the families whose members are killed by guns, it's actually fairly irrelevant whether that gun was legal or illegal. It doesn't make a difference. The point is, they've lost a loved one, and I think we need to remember that. So Gun Free is going to offer basically 3, what we see as 3 interventions, which both from global good practice and from interventions in South Africa, we know have given us some success. But I'm also clear they're not the only solutions. Gun violence, like violence in general, it's a complex phenomenon. A whole lot of different drivers, different constituencies, different perpetrators, different victims. But as been said by others, we need a multi-pronged approach to this issue. So let's look at the first strategy for intervention, and it's called preventing diversion. Diversion is a term that we use in the small arms control community, and basically preventing diversion, all it means is, how does one stop guns moving from the legal pool to the illegal pool? So we know that the majority of guns across the world are legally manufactured. And across the life cycle of a gun, there are opportunities for diversion. So is that thing up? It's a lot of detail. I'm not going to take you through it in the detail. I'm using it to illustrate that at the global level, this is kind of developed from some of the UN processes, there's an acknowledgement that there's a legitimate cycle of legal movement of weapons.
And you'll see there's the manufacture of 8 million guns produced globally every year, and they enter into the system through the gun dealer or the arms broker, and the legitimate legal transaction moves. That top cycle is civilians, the bottom is state security agencies such as military and police. The broken arrows, all they demonstrate is that at the institutional level or at the procedural level or at the kind of structure that's part of the legal chain, there are opportunities for diversion. There are opportunities for guns to move from the legal to the illegal trade. And in the center, it's the whole lot of misuses. And the numbers aren't in order. They're about where are their particular interventions. And you'll see a lot of it is things like some of the brokering agreements that have been agreed at the UN level, the arms trade treaty, etc. So that's the global picture, to give you some understanding of the link between legal and illegal guns. So Gunfrey looked at this and thought it's too kind of a macro picture. Let's bring it closer to home. Let's look and see what happens when you try and apply some of this analysis to the firearms control management chain in South Africa. So we developed this matrix, and what we did is we looked at where all along the chain are the opportunities for diversion, and I'm going to need to turn my back to you. So all we've done, and this is not comprehensive, we identified 4 of the kind of central institutions. This is part of our institutional framework of controlling weapons in this country. The Central Firearms Register, the accredited firearms training institutions, your police stations, and your gun dealers. And what you see there, so let's look at the gun dealers. We've identified what are some of the processes that happen at the gun dealer level. So of course it's the point of sale. Gun dealers are required by the Act to maintain registers, etc. So that's part of the chain, and all of those will present opportunities for diversion. So then that's where you see, okay, so now we're populating that thing, which is the term that people use, and now you start seeing those red dots are the points of diversion across all of the processes, the institutions, and of course the people involved. Okay. So that doesn't look very good. And in fact, it looks a bit overwhelming. And I think it's one of the central things when we are talking about the control over firearms. There's a recognition that guns are robust commodities. They are particularly a desirable product, especially for criminals. So when we're thinking about solutions for preventing diversion, we need to acknowledge this. We are never going to close the tap completely. The nature of the firearms chain is that people will want guns at some point, and they will leak. The question we have to be engaging with is how do we reduce the risk for leakage? And I guess one of the reasons is the structure helps us understand where the potential is for diversion, and therefore it gives us clues for intervention. And how do we close the loopholes? And this is, I mean, so that's the fun picture that we enjoyed making. But this is not just a graph in our heads that we've worked out. Yesterday, the headline in the Star, most of you would have seen it, is "This is real. Cops, guns linked to gangsters." Okay. So we know that the key institutions which are responsible for preventing the diversion of weapons from the legal to the illegal are involved in corrupt and fraudulent practices, whether it's at the Central Firearms Registry, whether it's at dealers, whether it's DFOs, etc. We've got enough evidence, and in fact there was sufficient evidence in 2013 for the then Minister, Nathi Mthethwa, to establish a committee of inquiry into fraudulent practice, both at the CFR and firearm dealers. Gunfrey made a submission to that, as did many people in this room. And that's an acknowledgement then from the side of the ministry that fraudulent practice, corruption, all along the firearms control management chain is a huge challenge and is a problem that I don't think we've adequately addressed, and gun-free would table as one of the key issues we have to pay attention to, because if we don't address it, this is the face of diversion. Okay, this is the net result. So what are some of the solutions? One of the solutions is to develop a systems-based approach to addressing the possibilities and the points of diversion, and therefore for tightening up. A second approach, and this is really a kind of key international norm, is good record keeping. You need accurate data. You need to know who's owning what gun for which purpose, where are the loopholes, where is the leakage, what are the stocks in state institutions. As you know, in our country, it's not just SAPS, the military and correctional services that have weapons, but every state institution has a weapons stock. And of course, good record keeping enables one to develop a good analysis of where the loopholes are, what the patterns and trends are, and therefore how best to intervene. Good marking and tracing is really important, and we're seeing that coming into the Firearms Amendment Bill. In terms of the International Tracing Instrument, a UN instrument, some incredibly useful guidelines in the ITI about why marking and tracing is critical for reducing leakage and for preventing the circulation of illegal guns. And then, of course, good gun laws. But one of the things I want to put on the table for discussion is that we need to see as the public that report from the Committee of Inquiry that was set up in 2013. We know the Minister has the report. We need to see that report. We need to understand, even if we don't see the whole report, but we need to understand what were the key findings of the report and what are the recommendations. So, second strategy. The second strategy is mopping up the illegal guns in the pool. There are a number of actions here, and we've seen South Africa's been relatively good at doing this. The one is Operation Satunya, and I'm not going to go into that because Guy Lamb did that. So it's special police operations. There was also Operation Michelle, which is a coordinated effort between Mozambique and South Africa in destroying arms caches. The usual police operations, crime recovery operations, etc. But one of the interventions that has yielded some good results both in South Africa and across the world is firearm amnesties. And I'm going to focus specifically on that and talk a little bit more about firearm amnesties. So we have really good examples, and I don't know if any of you get the City Press, but this is a piece by Rob Mugger. He's the director of IGAREPE, which is a Brazilian research institute, and the heading was Give Firearms Amnesties a Chance. And I'm going to talk a little bit about where the Brazilian example ticks all the boxes of what works well. In terms of firearms amnesties in South Africa, the Firearms Control Act gives the minister the power to declare an amnesty. The minister has the power also to determine the conditions of the amnesty, and then of course needs to get approval by Parliament. But why? Why would governments use firearm amnesties? It's seen generally by those governments who have done this as a tool or a mechanism that is available to government to control both their legal stocks as well as to mop up illegal stocks. Now we know that the primary objective of amnesties is to recover illegal guns. That's its primary purpose. But it has a very important secondary objective, and that is it becomes an opportunity for the disposal of unwanted guns, of guns that are not used. And we've seen that in amnesties both here in South Africa and elsewhere. And this is not just about civilians, this is state institutions that have had guns locked up in safes for 20 years, don't know where they are. Those guns need to get out of circulation. In South Africa, we've had several amnesties over the last 20 years, and the most successful amnesty was in 2005. And that yielded just over 100,000 firearms. We learned some important things about that amnesty. And the one, and I think it's perhaps the most important lesson, is that amnesties are most successful when they are held in conjunction with the introduction of stricter gun laws. So in 2005, it was the beginning of the introduction of the renewals period, which was a new provision in the FCA. And that was one of the reasons. It also is in conjunction with other efforts, such as special police operations. And we're in a moment right now, an opportunity presents itself where we have an amendment coming before Parliament which is fundamentally strengthening the existing gun law. So there's an enormous opportunity to maximize the passage of this bill and to declare an amnesty. So that would be a very specific call that Gunfree would put is we need a national firearms amnesty. Amnesties are also, I mean, one of the reasons why amnesties work, actually, and we haven't done that here, and we should be doing that here, is no questions asked. That doesn't mean you're just you could have big trommels where people can just chuck in their gun. But it doesn't mean that you don't record the detail of the gun. When the person hands in the gun, you record the detail, but you don't record the identity of the person. No questions asked amnesty. That is one of the key conditions for a successful amnesty, and for a whole range of reasons. Our government and our police are reluctant to go this route. Other important elements for successful amnesty are the usual things of strong partnership between police and government and civil society, excellent communication strategies, and of course it's an opportunity to educate and raise awareness around the risks and dangers of gun violence. Other factors include destroying the gun at the point of handing, having neutral venues, and having a public destruction soon after that. So what are the key factors for success? The conditions on the amnesty, the timing, the duration, the partnerships, the communication strategy. And Brazil is an excellent example, but my time is running out, so maybe one of you can ask me a question. 460,000 weapons taken off the street over a period of a year. Within a year, 8% reduction in firearm homicides. So I won't talk more about Brazil. Colombia, the same. But let's look at the third strategy, because my time is running out, is turn off the leaking tap. So essentially what this means is knowing, and this is where the data comes in, knowing the what, the who, the why, the how. But under this question, the most important is the where and the how. Where and how are guns moving from the legal pool into the illegal pool? Because then if you understand that, you can develop interventions to at least reduce the risk of diversion. And it's certainly to reduce the leakage and ultimately to stop it. But as I said earlier, I'm not sure that that's going to be completely possible. So you need to turn off the tap. The life cycle, all of that stuff showed us where the potential is. We've got some knowledge. We've got a lot of data in this country. We've got some of the best data, certainly on the continent. And we know that there are essentially three sources of leakage from the legal to the illegal. The one is the cross-border trade and conflict zones. The other is corrupt practices all the way along the firearms control chain, both systemic and individual. And then the last is loss and theft from previously owned, like a previously owned motor vehicle. It's loss and theft from someone who's owned it, whether it's the state, whether it's individuals, whether it's a private security industry or other state institutions. And so that's what loss and theft looks like. That is a weapon moving from a legal owner, whether it was a police officer or a civilian, but if your stolen gun was there, so were you. So it's about connecting legally, the connection between people who are licensed to possess And then for a whole range of reasons, those weapons move out. That's what feeds some of our criminal violence. So to end, what are some of the key interventions that have shown to work to help us turn off the tap? The one is accurate. And so, for example, right now, we don't actually really know how many guns are lost and stolen. The data we have from 2011 from an affidavit by the Minister of Police is that it's 18,000 annually from civilians and 2,000 from SAPs. Towards the end of last year, the Minister, Nakli Nhleko, asked a question, and that changed to 8,000 overall. 5,000, Ms. Fourie gave those numbers. So we don't know, we don't have accurate enough data on what is the movement. But still 8,000 is a significant number of weapons moving out. And then I guess the final thing of turning off the tap is strengthening the firearms control regime. Both effective implementation of the existing legislative framework, but also regular review to see, is the law meeting our current needs? And we have an incredible opportunity in the next couple of months to help make that happen. Thank you.
Afternoon, everybody. My name is Martin Hood. I represent the security industry this afternoon. I've been involved in the legislative processes that led up to the Firearms Control Act going back to about 1997. Just as an aside, in the US Supreme Court, they've got a little light in front of someone who's presenting, and when that light goes on, Adele, you stop talking. I want to be less dogmatic. I don't want to talk about firearms per se. I think we've heard enough about firearms. I want to talk particularly to the Portfolio Committee because I want to talk solutions, people. But in order to get solutions, you have to identify what the problems are. I originally had done a presentation on the security industry. I think that's probably going to be moved to tomorrow. So I've been furiously making a few notes to make it look like I know what I'm going to say. And I indicated earlier that I was going to talk about the criminal justice system. And I think that we need to very seriously examine a number of elements of what makes up our society. And there's been a lot of discussion today about people who don't obey the law. And the obvious question is, why don't people obey the law? And I want to give some examples because I work in the criminal justice system. And I don't think there's anybody present today representing either the magistrates or judges, which is of concern, because if we're going to look for solutions, we need to know exactly what the problems are from every different perspective of the value chain, so to speak, so that we can identify where the flaws are and resources can be allocated to addressing those flaws. If you look at the criminal justice system, it starts with somebody laying a complaint or a police officer seeing an offense commissioned in his presence or her presence, and that results in an investigation. It may result in an arrest, and it may result after a prosecutor has examined the docket in a court appearance. That process, which should be simple, is extremely problematic. I want to congratulate General Satoli in particular because he very honestly made some comments earlier on about crime and about resources and about the abilities of the police. And I think at the outset, let me apologize to my colleagues in blue. You know, I always moan at you and I always say that you're the problem. Well, I'm going to do it again today. If we look at how crime is investigated, we have a problem in our detective services. The detective services are under-resourced, they're overworked, they have literally hundreds of dockets. They're expected to investigate, prosecute, and present a case to court where they may not even have a motor vehicle to enable them to go and interview witnesses. And one of the flaws in the system is that it takes so long for a matter to come to court that witnesses give up. People who started off as willing complainants or willing witnesses become frustrated after repeated court appearances and postponements that they simply don't come. And they ignore subpoenas if they even subpoenaed at all. That's the first problem. The second problem is that prosecutors are overworked, understaffed, under-resourced. They do not have even access to the Firearms Control Act and its regulations. Many prosecutors don't even know that there are regulations. And if they do have the legislation, they don't have amended or updated versions of the legislation. This piece of legislation is now facing its 5th major amendment without the 4th major amendment being promulgated. Only parts of the 2006 amendment have been promulgated. The majority of it has not been promulgated. So the end result is that prosecutors can't even make head or tail of the law. It's become very disjointed, very confusing, and it results in criminals getting off. And we do not want violent criminals in our society. We want them off the streets in prison where they are correctly punished and where they are either rehabilitated or they remain in jail. It's as simple as that. So the criminal justice system is not dealing effectively with firearm offenders. But the problem doesn't stop at firearms. It involves every single offender. There's ample evidence that suggests if a person starts off doing petty crime, often drug or alcohol related as a youth, they escalate to more serious crime over time if they are not caught and rehabilitated at an early stage. The Firearms Control Act, in terms of its actual implementation, is problematic. And I made a call earlier. I said, don't go and change anything until we've got the basics in place. And I want to reiterate that call. I'm going to give a couple of examples of how the Firearms Control Act has not been properly implemented. There is a provision, I think it's section 126, that allows the Registrar of Firearms to issue a certificate confirming information on the database as correct. I have many matters, criminal matters, dealing with firearm prosecutions, and I've never seen such a certificate. And if I did, I would be able to prove that it's in all probability incorrect. The data is seriously flawed. And every day that goes by, that data becomes more and more corrupt, and the problem that we face gets bigger and bigger. We have to deal with basic data before we start changing anything. Data processing is a problem, and I echo Adele's call for the Commission of Inquiry details to be made public, because I know what is in that Commission of Inquiry findings, and it's nothing to do with dealers and it's nothing to do with trainers, it's all to do with systems and the police. A simple example would be from a dealer's point of view. They have to submit details of their stock returns, which they faithfully do in terms of the Act every single week. And it's ignored. We've had this debate. Process the SAP 350s. And then a police officer comes with 10,000 firearms on a list and says, why don't you have these firearms? And the dealer says, well, I don't because I've sold them, and if you process my information, you'd know that I don't have these firearms. And then a debate ensues as to who's right and who's wrong. And the end result is that with inaccurate records, it's impossible to properly track and trace firearms. Whilst I don't agree with Adele's presentation about the involvement of dealers where guns migrate from the legal to the illegal trade, where I do agree with her is that without proper data processing, it creates the opportunity for firearms to not be properly tracked and recorded. And that is a fundamental problem, not with the Firearms Control Act, but its implementation. I'm going to end with two very simple calls. The first is, don't blame firearm owners for the situation that we're in today. It's not that simple. I think from the debates that we've heard today, the issues that have been raised show that this is a very complex issue, and it's not only limited to firearms. There are far bigger social issues that need to be addressed. My second call is, we have a piece of legislation that over 10 or so years has been tested. It has been found to work in some respects. It has been found to be lacking in many other respects. Until we get the basic fundamentals right, and that means Portfolio Committee resourcing the police on the one hand, and it means holding them to account on the other. But until we get those basics in place, you can build as much as you want on those bad foundations. It's not going to stand up.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and in particular, honourable members of the Portfolio Committee. I take it that I won't be interjected with any points of order because the Speaker is not here. My fellow panelists, my name is Norman Arendse. I am a practicing lawyer. I am also a member of the South African Football Association National Executive Committee and the chairperson of the Legal and Constitutional Committee of that organization. I'm standing in for Dr. Danny Jordan, who's not well and who's asked me to speak on his behalf. He didn't prepare a paper, so I put together some notes of my own, and hopefully I will represent both SAFA and the Senzo Mahiwa gun committee that was established by SAFA immediately or in the wake of his untimely death last year. Hopefully I will represent that committee's views fairly and accurately. The topic for today is strategies to reduce illegal firearms in society. I've just relabeled that to read strategies to reduce firearms in society. And the reason why I say that is because today, or right now, even while I'm sitting next to my colleague, Mr. Hood, and he may be sitting with a legal firearm, when I take it from him or he drops it and I take it into my possession, it becomes an illegal firearm. So it's quite a simple proposition. Whether legal or illegal firearms, it's a lethal weapon that kills and maims many thousands of young men and women, children, elderly, disabled. Yes, a gun, like someone described it, is an inanimate object, like a pen, or a car, or alcohol, or cigarettes, but it also has to be propelled by a human being. But the analogy with any other inanimate object is entirely misplaced and is quite absurd. A gun more often than not, kills or causes other forms of irreparable and irreversible harm. Legislation is designed to regulate human behavior, the use, the possession, the control and ownership of guns, but not a gun itself, whether it's a legal or an illegal gun or firearm. Having said that, however, as much as legislation is important and continues to be important, and the focus of this symposium is on strengthening our legislation, we do live in a complex society, and a number of speakers and contributors in the audience have already mentioned this. We live in a complex society. We have a world-class constitution. We have first world laws, but we have many of the third world woes, socio-political problems, which is rooted in apartheid and which will take many more than the 20 or so years of our democracy since 1994. These are complex problems that will take many years to eradicate or to resolve. But we can't wait for this while our soccer heroes and heroines are being killed by the use of firearms, whether they are illegal or legal, and whether they are the Senzo Mahiwas or the River Steenkamps. SAFA as an organization is the most broad-based organization in the country. It is represented in 52 regions across the country and covers every corner of our country. 2 million boys and girls, men and women, play organized football out of a population of plus minus 50 million. Football is the one code of sport that has suffered disproportionately as a result of gun violence. Why? Because it is the sport of the poor and the disadvantaged, and those who play it continue to live in hope that they'll become a Messi or a Serrero or a Ronaldo or a famous soccer player. They live in the most depressed areas across the country, where policing is generally of a much lower standard than in the urban areas, and where the police are often under-resourced. Because I represented the police in the Khayelitsha inquiry, I can't say much more than that. It is in fact dangerous to play football in our country, in the townships. Often matches don't take place because of gang violence. Matches are postponed. Matches are even settled by the use of guns. The most recent death, or last year in October, the death of Senzo has highlighted the indiscriminate use of a gun. But the questions that are immediately raised are, was it indiscriminate or was it deliberate? We don't know, because our police have given no indication that the killer or perpetrators will or have or likely to be apprehended, despite him being gunned down in front of between 3 to 5 eyewitnesses. This is extraordinary. No gun residue tests, no forensics, no arrests other than a false arrest. What chance do ordinary citizens, ordinary footballers, men and women, boys and girls have, that if they are gunned down or killed, that their perpetrators would be brought to justice? What chance is there that a cousin of mine, who was killed last year shortly after Senzo's death in Nova Park in the early hours, age 23, what chances are that his killers will be apprehended? What chances 6 youth 2-3 years ago in Lavender Hill, footballers who came from soccer practice, they were gunned down while in their car, apparently a case of mistaken identity. What are the chances that their killers or perpetrators of their death would be brought to justice? What chance the chairperson and his brother of the Nova Park Cricket Club, who were also recently shot down in a case of mistaken identity in Nova Park, that their killers will be brought to justice? I suppose in the case of my cousin, he was after all 23, unemployed, and probably on tick. Just another statistic. What about the gun that was used to kill Senzo Mayiwa? Was it a legal or an illegal firearm? We don't know. Does it matter? He was killed. We were robbed of our best goalkeeper just before the African Cup of Nations. Arguably, his death was the reason why we lost AFCON, because as all of us know now, that he had never before conceded a goal, but in the AFCON we conceded 5 goals by using 3 goalkeepers. In fact, I was asked by Dr. Jordan just to convey to you that whilst at AFCON he had to deal with numerous inquiries from co-presidents, other football administrators, ordinary footballers or players who participated in the tournament, to ask when are the killers of Senzo Mayiwa going to be apprehended and brought to justice. They find it quite extraordinary that he was killed in front of what appeared to be eyewitnesses, and no one has yet been brought to justice. What strategies would SAFA prefer? SAFA maintains that ultimately only accredited and properly vetted law enforcement officers, whether public or private, must be permitted to possess what is called handguns or small arms or firearms, and those in certain defined categories. I think they are found in the Firearms Act. Civil society needs protection against all forms of firearms. Dr. van As has demonstrated that the use of firearms for so-called self-defense is either a myth or alternatively is overstated and exaggerated. In fact, who knows whether a person or another person possesses a legal gun or not? Its deterrent effect is therefore highly questionable. The most recent example of Oscar Pistorius demonstrates that even if he is to be believed, the use of a legal firearm has or can have fatal consequences. By contrast, where it is known that a person has a legal firearm, the chances are significantly higher that a burglary or a robbery will occur and there'll be an attempt to steal the firearm. In this regard, there appears to be an assumption amongst robbers or potential robbers and burglars that there's likely to be a gun in a middle class or upper class suburban area. That this is so places many of our compatriots who own also legal firearms, we place them at risk. A recent example is a colleague of mine who also practices as an advocate and who also happens to be a police reservist. He had a break-in in his house, and when he walked into the lounge, he was apprehended, he was held not at gunpoint but at knife point, at panga point, and the first question that he was asked is whether he had a gun in his house. With his training and no doubt his bravery to protect his family, he managed to overcome the intruders and the attackers, and he actually apprehended them himself and called the police. We in SAFA, we call for an amnesty, for the return on an anonymous basis of all illegal firearms, and for those owners of legal firearms also return them if their firearms have fallen into disuse, because it is self-evidently dangerous to possess a gun. The chances are that if stolen, that it will actually be used to kill you or to maim you. That all that illegal and legal firearms will be returned after the commission of crimes, which is often the reason given by the police, and I think Adele alluded to this, why it shouldn't be on an anonymous basis. We say that this would be a relatively or proportionately small price to pay to ensure that we build a safer society. Some of the other strategies that we would propose, the first one is clearly education, more education, and even more education about the use of firearms. Thirdly, we must declare all sports venues or arenas, whether it's soccer, cricket, rugby, or any other code, gun-free zones, like we did in 2010 when we hosted the World Cup. Why did we do it for FIFA and we cannot do it for our own citizens? Upon a fourth strategy, upon the return of guns, following the amnesty, we wish to erect a statue to honor the memory of Senzo Muhiwa at Safa House, and we would also suggest that all communities must erect either their own statues or monuments to commemorate those who have fallen as a result of the use of firearms. and to also serve as a daily reminder of the danger of firearms. That whether it's discriminate or indiscriminate use, does kill and maim. Fifthly, we will continue to support and commend the use or the passing of progressive legislation to reform and regulate the more effective the possession and use of firearms, and we, like many others here today, call for the more effective use of laws and its enforcement. But again, as already been pointed out during the course of today, we cannot do so if we lack the capacity and if there is corruption. It's quite disconcerting to hear that the amnesty that we read about in Gauteng recently, that the firearms returned there ended up here in the Western Cape. Clearly there's a corruption problem there. The other issue that's also been raised here today is that reliable and credible data provision is an imperative in the fight not only against crime in general, but against the use of firearms in particular. As citizens, we simply have to ask the question, who do we believe if there's no reliable and credible data? Because that's the basis of evidence. It's what I do for a living as a forensic lawyer. Before you make a statement, it must have a factual basis, or it must have a basis in the data, and there must be some empirical evidence that supports your contentions or your statements. But where there is a lack of transparency and a lack of credible and reliable data, then we will continue to grapple with the problems that we're grappling with today. On behalf of SAFA, on behalf of the Senzo Meyiwa Committee established by SAFA, we wish to thank the organizers for inviting us to participate in this very important landmark symposium. SAFA intends to continue with its campaign through the Senzo Meyiwa Committee by highlighting the issue of firearms and its disastrous effects and consequences. Lastly, we wish to call on the Minister and Parliament, when it is tabled, to declare the 9th of July 2015, which is also known as the International Gun Destruction Day, so called by the United Nations. It's apparently a United Nations initiative, that day be declared Amnesty Day for the return of all illegal firearms and the voluntary return of legal firearms. Thank you.
Let's thank the panelists first. Okay? And let's also remember that they did an excellent job speaking to the issues and leaving enough time for us to, in fact, ask questions of clarification, make sure we understand what exactly they're trying to say, and then maybe engaging them in some sort of debate. Because we're building collective knowledge and understanding here. So thank you. And I can also continue to invite both Adele and Attorney Hood to speak to some points that they may not have spoken to, and maybe it comes out in the questions. Okay? And to Advocate Arendse. Right, so the ladies hand at the back there, I'll come from there to the three hands over here. The gentleman over there, you haven't spoken before. So I'll come down the way here, and then I'll come to the two of you. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then I'll hold you for the next round. Is that okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you to the panel. My name is Togo Mpumlwana. I come from the Commission for Gender Equality. I'm also a representative in the Senzo Meyiwa Committee. And I would like to share why we support the campaign. It was not really specifically about Senzo as a person, but Senzo represents what happens in our society as a result of guns. For us at the Commission for Gender Equality, we represent a constitutional ethos of a society with human dignity, respect for life, and respect for the other, regardless of status, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of whether you're a woman or a man. But we have done a study that shows that femicide is increasing in South Africa. In not just homicide, which means homicide is increasing, but in that context, in families, the killing of women and children through guns is a matter of concern to us. And so we joined it in a hope that it will be part of a campaign. And when the issue of the legislation came up, we thought we should also put in the pot that time has come for the gun laws to be, in fact, made even more stricter. Because some of the guns that are out there are guns that shouldn't be held by people. We are of the view that gun laws should be stricter to protect the lives of those who normally would not even own a gun. Children would not own a gun, and normally women are unlikely to own guns. It's the patriarchal syndrome that if you own a gun and you're a man, you will be protecting your family. And sometimes it's the same gun that kills families. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we come down as we acknowledge, please?
Never been good with microphones. So my name is Brian Menny. I'm from Gun Owners of South Africa, and I'd like to ask two questions, if I may. Firstly, I'd like to ask Ms. Kirsten, you referred to 2005 as the success or the most successful amnesty. And then you spoke at length about concepts of leakages and crossing portals and guns changing statuses, etc. Of those 105,000 firearms, how many were obsolete SAPS weapons? How many were obsolete SANDF weapons? How many were lawful weapons never used in the commission of offense that were handed in? And how many were actually weapons handed in that had been involved in criminal actions? Thank you. That was my first question. My second question, I wanted to follow up to what my colleague Johan stated earlier when he asked a former presenter who, and I ask this again because Advocate Orenser based some premises on the research. When he stated that firearms were most likely to be taken away and used against you and were in essence ineffective as self-defense tools, but the very person who made that research, as my colleague mentioned earlier, said that his research should not be used to draw that conclusion. So surely, Advocate, being a forensic person, and as you stated, basing your understanding of and your building of strategies and facts, you should review some of those aspects and elements. Thank you.
And Brian, I suspect you have the answers to those numbers in case Adele doesn't have it.
No, I'm asking because I would like to know.
You know, I mean, we all would, but if she doesn't, then maybe you have it. You know, people often ask the question and they know the answer, so.
Good day, my name is Mark Neves. I'm representing the South African Defensive Pistol Association. More question and a comment for Advocate Arendse, and I think that Adele has echoed the same kind of sentiments. Advocate Arendse asked us the question, does it matter if a firearm is legal or illegal? I believe that's a very important distinction. My concern is that we'll be diverting and possibly squandering precious state and civil resources in terms of administering and targeting legal firearm owners who by definition are law-abiding citizens because they've already met the provisions of the Act, instead of going after criminals. And I've heard very few strategies in terms of addressing the firearms in illegal possession. I think it will be negligent to administer the legal firearm owners when we forget about the illegal firearms, which are actually the problem in society. Thank you.
Thank you. Tebogo.
Thank you. Tebogo again, Kwape, Sports Shooting Forum. I've got a question for Mr. Hood and Advocate Arendse. The first one for Mr. Hood is, you've alluded to the current Act and its functioning and how effective, more or less, it has been. I just want to find out what your position is with regard to, because we've referred now and then to the amendments, what your position is with regard to the proposed amendments, more specifically to micro-dotting, ballistic testing, the period within that has to be done and so forth and so forth. Have you done any, perhaps, investigation in terms of the feasibility of that, the impact it might have on, for instance, the illegal gun issues we have in the country? That's a question for you. Another question for Advocate Arendse is, SAFA has made a suggestion with regard to a Senzo gun law. We've had other deaths in the country. Prominent people have passed on, knives. Other people have been killed by tires and so forth and so forth. Now, would you perhaps accept that if there is a call for a gun law, perhaps there should also be a knife law, a tire law, all of that? Well, what's your thinking on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. Yes, I actually want to refer to something that Adele said. Adele and I have crossed swords before, but I'm not attacking her. I know she has armed response. I'm scared of armed response. I also want to refer in this response or in this question to issues that Advocate Arendse raised. Specifically with respect to the fact that the poorest of the poor, supporting soccer, being soccer players, etc., etc. So we have this huge quantity of people out there that 99% of them are not regarded as legal firearm owners, as licensed firearm owners. Sorry, that's another thing that we need to clear up here, please. We tend to mix up the terms illegal firearms and unlicensed firearms. I think that's not helpful. We have to move to a point where we're actually all talking about the same thing. When we talk of illegal firearms, firearms can't be illegal. A firearm is a firearm. It's like talking about an illegal hammer. They're in unlawful possession, or they are unlicensed. Anyway, just the pedant in me demands that I make that point. But when we talk about the poorest of the poor and communities that play soccer, our people, our South African people out there. It's kind of like, and we're also talking about amnesties in the same sense, which is why I'm referring to the point that Adele raised. Excuse me. There are estimates, and half of my people on the pro-gun side are probably going to want to cut my throat for this. They wouldn't shoot me because that would be something they wouldn't do. But the elephant in the room really is the large quantity of unlicensed firearms which are completely uncatalogued. Researchers from various institutions have made attempts to enumerate these, and they can't because they're unlicensed, they're unregulated. But there's a great quantity of firearms out there which are held by people, particularly in communities that can't afford armed response. That is their only defense. They're held by people, they're illegally held firearms, they're unlicensed firearms, but they're held for a purpose other than to commit crimes with. They're held for self-defense, for protection. People who live in soccer playing communities that don't have a brick house to live in. So when they encountered the legislation and required to apply for a firearm license, they need to have a fixed place of residence. They don't have a fixed place of residence. If they wanted to buy a firearm for self-defense purposes to protect them and their families, they have nowhere to lock it up. They have no safekeeping facilities because there's nowhere to bolt prescribed safekeeping facilities down to. They don't have a concrete wall or a concrete floor. So then there's the cost involved, the cost of purchasing a firearm from a dealer, or the cost of the training, etc., etc. So a lot of those people have, and the special advisor to SAGA actually referred to it a little bit earlier. There are a lot of people that have been forced into acquiring firearms on the black market, but for legitimate purposes, to defend themselves, to protect themselves. And the numbers on those are sometimes, well, some of the research that's been done on it estimates that there's 7.5 million firearms, unlicensed firearms out there in the communities being used for self-defense purposes. So when we talk about an amnesty, these people have a very distinct and definite purpose for those firearms, those illegally held firearms. I'm speculating because I don't know them. I'm a licensed firearm owner. I don't involve myself in that. But it leads me to believe that we need, in some form of an amnesty, these people need that firearm because it is their only source of protection. They don't have any other way of protecting themselves and their families. So they're forced to become illegal. So when we're looking at an amnesty, can we not have an amnesty, can we not examine the possibility of an amnesty that reaches out to these people, that would provide training to these people without, they don't want to give up, they're not going to give up the firearm, but let's give them an amnesty so that they can become licensed firearm owners. How about that for an idea? We can maybe get them all in the pool. Once they're all in the pool of licensed firearm owners, we know what firearms they have, we can control the firearms. Sorry, that's just a suggestion.
Thanks, Paul. Final comment, you in the next round. No, but there was somebody before you, so I'm, okay, because I've acknowledged you, so we begin. Just 1 second.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. My question or comment is to the SAFA representative. Soccer, it's one of those sports which has a large following. Now, my question to him is that since, well, they have a large following in that sport code, I just want to know, because as South African Police Services or as the ministry, one of our approaches to fight crime is community mobilization and partnerships. Whether have they considered working with South African Police Service in partnership to ensure that we fight against all serious and violent crimes, including gun-related crimes? And whether are they also maybe having a program to make sure that they mobilize all their followers to participate in sector crime forums, in our rural safety forums, in all forums which are intended to fight crime at every level, from the street level up to anywhere. Because our belief as South African Police Service is that if everyone is involved in the fight against crime, then even whether it is illegal firearms or legal firearms, if it's illegal firearms, let them be reported, and that if it's legal firearms and are being used for illegal activities, they must also be reported. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that's licensed and unlicensed firearms. Thanks, General. Can we have the panel respond, and then we'll take the three hands. Okay, 4 hands now, 5 hands now. Okay, Special Advisor, we've seen you.
Okay, I'll kick off. Let's talk about amnesties. I want to make a few general comments. The three of us, as lawyers say, are ad idem in one respect. We're of one mind, and that is any amnesty must be unconditional. Now, I don't want to debate the good or bad of amnesties, other than the fact that I personally don't think a criminal is going to hand in the tool of their trade. But if you do want to have an amnesty, it must be unconditional. One of the problems with the last amnesty was that there was certain records that had to be taken, and that acted, in my view, as a disincentive towards an effective amnesty. So if you are going to have an amnesty, then it should be unconditional. I want to talk about the amnesty firearms as well, because I do know one end of a muzzle from another. And I was given the opportunity by the South African Police Services, thank you very much, and I sometimes do get on quite well with them, to inspect some firearms that were being sent for destruction down in Vanderbijl Park. And I was very, very concerned to note the manner in which firearms have been recorded, because parts of firearms had actually been recorded as firearms, even when they did not constitute in law a firearm in itself. And that really concerned me because it skews the statistics. It makes the number of firearms be inflated. And we must be very careful of that, because that creates the incorrect impression. And it ties in, I think, with Brian's question about which of those firearms have been used in crimes. Now, again, the South African Police Services had put on display some AK-47s and some other automatic rifles, but they were very, very much in the minority. They were not the firearms that were predominantly handed in. The type of firearms that were handed in were old, obsolete heirlooms for which people had no use. There were very few firearms, in my view, that were handed in by criminals because they suddenly formed the desire to become rehabilitated. And that's why I think that amnesties are not effective. The next point I want to make is we talk about the unfortunate murder of Senzo Meyer and the Oscar Pistorius situation. What we all seem to have overlooked in today's debate, in focusing on the firearm, is that in every single incident that we've spoken about, be it Dr. van Asse's daughter, be it Pistorius, or any other unfortunate injury or death, is that the use of the firearm was an offense. It was murder. And we're focusing too much on the use of the firearm. We're not focusing on the criminal who commits the act. My colleague has made the very, very pertinent comment that in the Senzo Meyer murder, basic policing was not done. And we can only speculate why it was not done. But that inhibits proper investigation. And we need to ask ourselves, why are proper investigations not being done? We're not going to stop criminals committing criminal acts unless we catch them and put them in jail. My last comment, if I may, Tebogo, you asked me about these amendments. I'm going to be very brief because it's a topic in itself, but in my presentation I spoke about the inability of the police, through no fault of their own, to process data properly. And we've spoken about information, we've spoken about statistics. Data is the cornerstone of effective control. We mustn't forget that. The amendments require a significant amount of data processing. Data processing that the police simply do not yet have the capacity to do. And I'm not criticizing, I know my colleagues from the Central Firearm Registry are here, I'm not criticizing them, it's a fact. And they themselves, not these people, but the police themselves have told me that they cannot do it. Ballistics have told me that they cannot do ballistic testing. The Portfolio Committee would like to go and find out where the SAPS Gauteng ballistic test results are. I'll take you to the boxes in province, gathering dust in corridors. That's the type of problem that we face. Until we can get basic resourcing allocated and in place, we are not going to achieve anything with amendments. The last issue on the amendments, which is something that hasn't been raised, is the proposed amendment to do away with the so-called SA Hunters Court decision. And that proposal is of the most concern to me as a lawyer, because we have a division between the legislature and the judiciary in this country. And constitutionally, the judiciary are one of the key checks and balances on executive or legislative power. And one of the proposals in the amendment is to do away with a court order. That fundamentally undermines the rule of law in the Constitution, because you cannot allow any government to pass a law that does away with a court order if they're unhappy with the court order. That simply means that there is no check or balance on the legislature. So there's some very, very substantial challenges in the amendments of a practical and a legal nature, which we're going to have to address.
Thank you, MC. For obvious reasons, because we serve on the same committee, I agree with Toko entirely, so I'm not going to comment on her statement. She's made them in our committee meetings, and I agree with her. I do, if I were in a court case, I would have to rely on Professor van As, so I have to stick with him as far as his premise and his research is concerned, so I'm quite happy to do that. I'm quite comfortable. In fact, this morning, early already, I was wondering whether, until I think it was Adele who reminded me that there was some study done about the use of firearms in self-defense and what are the statistics. So perhaps in a court case I would have done my best to shift the onus onto him to show those statistics. But I remain unconvinced. It's true. I think the starting point of my presentation this afternoon was from a SAFA sportsperson point of view, that our youth in particular, our young men and women, are being killed. Of course, they're killed by tick, they're killed by HIV/AIDS, they're killed by other violent means, the use of pangas, knives, etc. But this is a particular focus on firearms. And my starting point was, it doesn't matter whether it's a legal firearm, i.e. one that is legally obtained, that has been registered under the Firearms Act and so on. It doesn't matter, because even as I speak, we don't know whether Senzo was murdered by a legal firearm or an illegal firearm. That is my starting premise. And that is a scourge in our society amongst many others that has to be addressed and to be eradicated. My address did also not proceed, Mark, from the premise that we must target legal gun owners and that it would be squandering state resources to do so. I proceed from the premise today that we have legal gun owners, as you quite rightly say, mostly law-abiding citizens, and you would recall that one of SAFA's strategies was that we continue to support the strengthening of legislation as far as the legal use of guns are concerned. But we've also highlighted, I think, here I find common cause with Mr. Hood that it also doesn't help if we don't have the capacity to do so. We can have first world-class laws, but if we don't have the capacity to monitor them, to supervise them, to implement them, and the use of data is not open and transparent, then that's also not going to help us in resolving because clearly there's a problem. And in fact, it's something that was raised, I think, Toko and Adele, who's also on the committee. So we had outnumbering Hood here today.
It's a conspiracy.
It's clearly a conspiracy which I'm quite happy to be party to. But yeah, one of the things, yeah, I forget the point now, but I'll get back to it. So it's not about targeting illegal gun owners. I mean, clearly there are other deeper issues. There are people, nameless, faceless people, who are running guns in the townships, who are selling guns. They are rogue police or former security police men and women who are using guns that they had under the previous regime, and they are running these guns. You know, personally, I think the first time I touched a gun was when I went to study in the States in 1991. And I was staying with an American Cuban of all people. So with that cocktail, you can imagine this guy is like really dangerous. But he gave me his Magnum. I couldn't even hold the thing like that. I had to take it with two. And it's the first time I touched a gun. So I come out of a community where we never used to know guns. Our community never knew guns. It is a relatively, if history is relative, it's a relatively new phenomenon that our community has been flooded with guns. I know as a boy, you used to have a little knife, you know, they used to prod you like that, but guns is so it's being flooded, and we need to get to the root cause of that problem, and it's clearly a policing problem, and then that raises the issue of police intelligence. How can it be that members in our community, they know who's running the guns, they know where the shebeens are, they know who's selling the tick, they know who's selling the mandrakes and the drugs, but somehow they're not being apprehended by the police. It's not rocket science. These things should be. Yes, I think why the Senzo and SAFA highlighted the Senzo gun law is clearly because it's to form a coalition around a person who was famous and who was well known. I would like to also call a gun law after my cousin who was shot and killed. But here, it's something that you can identify with and that you can coalesce around it, like Riva Steenkamp, you know, because of what happened to her. Yes, of course, SAFA is mostly composed of the poor and underprivileged soccer players, and they would not, if you apply the Firearms Act strictly, then many of them would not comply or be able to comply for the reasons that you've given. And it may well be that some of our members have firearms, but not to use them for ulterior motives or purposes. And it would also be to protect their families. I think Toko mentioned that for patriarchal reasons, you know, I must have a gun to protect. But equally, that gun in another situation under different circumstances can be used to commit murder and kill the family and the children. I'm not sure, obviously, an amnesty, but then these people must be encouraged to come forward and to say, look, I've got a gun. I did obtain it illegally. It's almost like a mini TRC. You've got to say, I've got an illegal firearm, I obtained it illegally, I possess it illegally, but I have never ever used it, and I've got no intention of using it for an illegal purpose. And maybe that's something the committee can look at. It's something that we can discuss with the football. In general, yes, I mean, SAFA is ideally placed to form a partnership with SEPS, to form community mobilization and partnerships to help to address and resolve serious and violent crimes. But as far as I'm aware, many of our members are involved in street committees. Many of our members are part of community police forums and get involved in sector policing. That is what I know. But as far as the committee itself, yes, we don't have such a program. I think I've answered or tried to answer some of the questions.
Okay, just a few comments. Brian, we do have the breakdown of that 100,000. In terms of the firearms, it was actually 100,066. The others were parts, you know, in terms of they weren't a whole firearm. So we've got the detailed breakdown of that. This amnesty really, and I mean the reasons I talked about the lessons we draw from that amnesty is it precisely does what I said. It targets illegal weapons, but it's an opportunity for people to hand in guns. So it did both of that. Of the 100,000, 53,435 were illegal weapons, and 46,631 were legal. What is it? Yeah, unwanted legal firearms. Okay, yeah. You need to, you know, the research also shows, and I guess this is to Paul's point around the definition of legal and illegal, is many of those unlicensed weapons that were handed in came from Sethunya too. So they were police recovery things, operations, but also it was people who were had a firearms control offense in that they were holding a weapon that they were not licensed to hold, that they had inherited and had not gone through the licensing procedure. So technically, in terms of our act, that's a weapon that you are holding without a valid license. So we need to understand that component as well. And amnesties are a really important moment for people to hand in guns that they don't want, because a gun in the home poses a number of risks. I think what was really significant about the 2005 amnesty is that of the just over 100,000 weapons that were recovered and handed in, 70,000 were handguns. Now that's a significant withdrawal of handguns from circulation if you think that 85% of our crime, handguns are used, because again, it's the weapon of choice for criminals. So I think, you know, it speaks to, there is much more detail about that. I think one of the other significant things was that almost 2 million rounds of ammunition were also recovered. And I think often when we're talking about firearms, we forget about ammunition, but that's as critical. And in terms of the ITI, the International Tracing Instrument, and in fact Brazil does this, there are moves towards individual marking of cartridges. Brazil does that, and it's certainly seen as a potential global norm, and could be something we could suggest for strengthening the gun law. Just, I want to say one or two more things around the amnesty. I think it was one of the weaknesses in the 2005 amnesty of not very good kind of what I call horizontal communication within the sort of police structures, and then, I mean, vertical and then horizontal with civilian population, is one of the things we can learn from Brazil, is that they segmented their target constituencies, and they had a massive communication strategy towards women. There's a famous story of a woman in Sao Paulo who managed to get her kids' guns, husband's guns. She brought in 1,700 guns. She handed in during the firearms amnesty in Brazil. Now, one of the things in Brazil, and I think it's something we need to discuss in much more detail than what we'll have time now, is Brazil, there were cash incentives. 30 reais for one weapon, depending on how many weapons you handed in. They set a maximum limit of 330. So of course the woman who handed in 1,500 went home with a lot of cash. It gets paid into your bank account 30 days after hand-in. Generally, and most of this experience comes from the US, is that cash incentives aren't great. They can actually feed the illegal market. So we've never done that here, but I think it's something we need to put on the table and discuss. If I can say one last thing around data, because we talked a lot about data. And I worry sometimes a little bit about the overemphasis on data, and it's certainly very much a kind of public health, and it's been WHO, the World Health Organization, have been a big driver of this, especially in relation to armed violence prevention, is we need data, we need data. And we tend to see data only as the stuff that researchers burrow away in their offices or go into the field. But the data that Dr. Lane Benjamin is talking about, the evidence of people's lived experience, is as important. That is data. And I think we must not forget that. And to give one very simple example, when Gun Free South Africa started in '94, we had one bit of data. One, we knew nothing else about guns, but we knew that 35 people were being killed every single day in our country. And we said that is unacceptable. In a new democracy, this is the biggest threat to our democracy. We can't, that's impossible. That's all the data we had. We've now got lots of data. But data, getting data must not, or not having enough data, must not stop us from acting and from knowing where we can begin to prevent gun violence.
We need not ask Adele any closing remarks. Hold on, Martin. We do have another round of questions, so I was hoping you would save your punchline for then. Can I take those 4 people I've identified? If you've now put your hand up, post those 4 people. We may not have the circle to do that. If you've spoken before, be gracious enough to give your time to someone else. So those 2 have not spoken before. I've acknowledged you both. So can the lady go first? Because her hand was up first, and then we'll come to you. Not because she's a lady. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Nadine Pryor from the South African Arms Dealers Association. It's not really a question, it's a comment for Advocate Arendse. Sports shooters can relate to your passion for your sport. But did you know that traditionally hunting rifles, target rifles, even target pistols and semi-auto shotguns and even non-military semi-auto rifles are traditionally not used in crime, yet you're calling for the removal of our soccer balls? That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Nadine.
Thank you, Chairperson. My name is Jerome Mage. I'm a member of the Portfolio Committee. The question I want to ask, I think an answer was attempted there, but I still want to understand when we talk about amnesty. It is said amnesty of illegal guns. And the way it is done, maybe I can even get more information how it is done somewhere else. I don't see a Tsotsi bringing a gun that has been used. If that gun is going to be recorded and maybe even checked if it was never used somewhere else. So there's no way in which, besides what the presenter said, that he can take his tool of trade and be left with nothing. But besides that, how is this understood to work out? Amnesty of illegal. I just want to understand. It's very difficult for me to understand, Tori. If I'm to be arrested, if I bring the weapon, how do you expect me to bring the weapon to you? And besides that, surely you can't simply say, there's a trash can there, everybody come and throw your weapons in there. We won't have CCTV cameras. You just come and throw them in there, and because if it is that way, it means some of those are supposed to be exhibits. And so I just want to get myself to understand what would be the best way to do amnesty for guns. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thanks, Jerome. Can I get the 2 hands, please? Go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Johan Skuman again from Gun Owners South Africa. What I got out of this panel discussion, there's a golden thread going through. It's frustration with implementation and enforcement. Our brothers and sisters in the thin blue line have come up for a lot of criticism today, and I take pity on them. But it is a fact of life that we are struggling with the fight against crime. We've heard from Adele Kirsten that one of the big sources of leakage of firearms is corruption. Difficulties in the administration process of licensing the firearms and of enforcing the existing gun laws. We've had Martin Hood eloquently describe the synergy, or lack thereof, between the police and the judicial services, and bringing a case from tracking and catching a criminal all the way through the court processes to a conviction. Advocate Arends has very eloquently explained the frustration of the nation, really, with there being no progress that we can see in bringing the killers of Senzo Meyiwe to justice. All of these things tell me one thing. Our police are overstretched. They're understaffed, they're underpaid, and they've got too much work. And now we are hearing from a lot of people submissions to increase their workload by calling for more gun laws, by calling for more databases and more registration and more systems to be put in place. The more difficult we make the registration of firearms, the more we are opening up the process to corruption and to leakages into the pool. We should be making it easier for the police so that they can free up manpower to go after Meyiwe's killer and the rest of the criminals out there. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, please.
It may be a little premature to say that we're actually asking for more of anything right now, so Mike.
I just want to have a look at some of the data that is available. And this is partly directed at Mr. Arends, but also at Ms. Kirsten. I am not sure whether we are overemphasizing the losses from civilian and state hands. If we look at, and I'm looking at the SAPS's annual performance plan for 2014-2015, which includes historical data for the years 2010 through to 2013. If you look at the recoveries of lost firearms, that is firearms lost from both civilian hands and state-owned. In 2010-2011, the police recovered 83.7%. In 2011-2012, 96%. In 2012-2013, 115.3%. There's actually not that much net leakage if you look at the numbers. The other statistic that is worth considering is the police's reaction times to alpha crimes. This is rape, murder, home invasions. If you look at the reaction, I'm looking at the national average. It obviously varies from province to province, but if you look at the national average, 2010-2011, it was 21.43 minutes. 2011-2012 was 19.06 minutes. 2012-2013 was 18.46 minutes. 2013-2014 was 19.05 minutes. The point is this: we don't have in-depth studies about the self-defense use of firearms. There's plenty of anecdotal evidence indicating that people do use firearms in self-defense. During those 20 minutes, many people will be dependent upon firearms in order to preserve their lives. We need to understand the data better before we create further restrictions which may condemn any number of people, an unknown number of people, to death. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. It's Ludwig Chair. I'm faced with a dilemma here because I have a lot of questions, but it's personal. I really have a difficulty with how I should, and it should be seen as a comment and not as a question or a criticism. And it is that we should be careful on jumping on bandwagons, like the killing of an individual, be it a Senso or a Riva, or even other people who are famous or rich. And now I'm going to do what I'm asking them not to do, and that's to jump on the bandwagon. Just either yesterday or the day before, I happened to see the TV news. I wasn't watching it. I think it's up in the north somewhere, so it's a real vague detail, but I'm sure somebody else will know about it. That a child was killed, and the community acted, and they killed the person that they thought killed the child. And in reality, what happened was the child got electrocuted by stealing electricity or making some illegal connection, and the community killed an innocent person by means of a tire. And now I'm jumping on a bandwagon, and that's not what I wanted to do. So for every jumping on a bandwagon, we could do the same. And I don't want to do that. Thank you.
Please, last comment, and then we'll have the panel close and go for 15 minutes tea.
Thank you very much, Chair. I had to make I had to make a call for gun-free stadiums. I'm sitting here, I'm asking myself, whilst I support the idea, but I'm looking at the practicality. I'm thinking of a stadium as big as FNB with a capacity of about 90,000. How big will the drop-off area be? Say maybe it's only a quarter of those people who are armed. How big will the drop-off area be? Thanks, Chair.
I'm going to start by just addressing my colleagues in blue. Until you grant my licenses, I'm not the only one criticizing you today, please. So don't, you're smiling. Thanks, Brigadier. On a more serious note, I think we need to steer away from emotional generalizations, and that's what I have here, the conspiracy. And I'm going to illustrate it by just examining one comment made by the lady, I can't remember your name, from the gender equality group. And she made a statement, women are unlikely to own a firearm. And it's that type of statement that I think lacks thought and analysis of the facts. I can't see Nadine is here. Nadine is most certainly a firearm owner. My wife is a firearm owner, and my senior associate, who's female in my practice, is a firearm collector. And that is just off the top of my head who I can think who are female firearm owners. So there are a lot of female firearm, sorry, I forgot Audrey from the Professional Hunters Association. And I also hunt with a lady who is a firearm owner and a huntress. So to say that this is very much a male or a macho phenomenon is incorrect. And that also shows why we need to get basic raw data and to analyze it and then to decide what we're going to do with it. But that type of general statement, unfortunately, sets the scene for these type of debates, and it takes the focus off the real situation, and we must do all that we can to avoid that. To go back to the amnesty, I've got two comments about the amnesty, and I'm going to take issue with Adele about her stats. I'm not disputing the numbers because I think that they are documented fairly well. But what Adele said, and this speaks to the effectiveness of amnesties, and it's something that must be borne in mind when we're going to allocate resources to an amnesty. 53,000 firearms were illegal. What that really means is that those 53,000 firearms were in the wrong hands, but they were documented. And there's a critical difference, and it speaks to what Paul was trying to say about how do you define an illegal firearm. What happened there was that those firearms were firearms which were documented. In other words, they had been licensed or they were still licensed, but the person who had the firearm was not the license holder. And the most common or typical example would be someone who's inherited firearms. So those were not criminals' firearms, and this is my point, because the other 40-odd thousand that were handed in that made up the 100,000 were people that had unwanted firearms. So by far, in fact, virtually all of those firearms were not firearms used by criminals. They were unwanted firearms. And that speaks to the effectiveness of an amnesty. The last amnesty in 2005, the minister promulgated a number of conditions. And we took issue with those conditions because we felt that they acted as a disincentive. And those conditions required the recording of the person who handed the firearm in, the details of the firearm, and the firearm needed to go for ballistic testing. So the end result is that if I have committed an offense with a firearm, I'm not going to go and hand it into the police and effectively convict myself. So if you are going to have an amnesty, the less conditions, the simpler it is, the better, please. And then I've just got to make one comment about Brazil, because Brazil has a very dark secret that Adele is trying very hard and hoping I'm not going to mention. And that is Brazil, in a national referendum, rejected gun control. And it was one of the biggest disappointments in recent times for the gun control lobby. So there are examples throughout the world where people of various nations are actually turning around and saying, no, we don't want gun control, we're going to deal with crime in other ways. And my last comment is, when it comes to partnerships in communities, we mustn't forget that the firearm organizations also want to partner with communities, and SAFA for that matter, because none of us want crime. Some of us want guns, but none of us want crime. And we must look to the Firearms Control Act, and this goes to the comment of the General. The Firearms Control Act already contains a provision that says it is a very serious offense to know about an unlicensed or illegal firearm and not report it. My call to everybody is, go back into the communities that you come from and tell your members to report those illegal firearms. And those people must be prosecuted. Let's start with the basics. Thank you.
I think, to be fair to one of, I think, Ms. Pryor, I did mention that there must be some categories that would have to be exempted. It's already the case under the Firearms Act. And I would have thought that sport shooters and hunting rifles and so on would fall under that category. I mean, clearly, our responses, and I agree, should not be emotional. I'll deal with that, and should be rational and not be arbitrary. And if there's no evidence that hunting rifles and so on are being used in the commission of crimes, there seems to me to be no rational basis to ban them. I do take issue, though, with the soccer ball analogy, because I know about the cricket ball that killed a very famous cricketer, Phil Hughes, but I'm not aware of a soccer ball killing anybody. But I am aware that hunting rifles and other guns do kill people. The other comrade over there about the Tsotsi, what incentive would there be for him or her to bring in a gun? There is the 2005 amnesty. We obviously have to look at that experience and see whether that can be improved. But let me rather, which we tend to do in a court, let me answer that question by asking a question. Would you prefer that Tsotsi to bring in this illegal firearm even though it was involved in the commission of an offense? Or would you wait for the police to resolve that crime, which may never happen, and where the chances of resolving that crime is remote? Would you rather prefer these illegal firearms to be brought in through an unconditional amnesty? And I would say the answer must be yes. I think I did touch on that issue. Of course, there is that problem. I anticipated that where a firearm may have been used in the commission of a crime, now it's being brought in through an amnesty process, and there goes your exhibit. But then that raises the obvious question. How far is the police in attempting to resolve that crime? And if the chances are remote, then clearly it must be preferable on a proportionality basis that the firearm be returned. I think Johannes doesn't require a response. I think the only response that I want to make is when a gun is used in self-defense, it seems to me, especially like in the case of my colleague, where a burglar or a robber was apprehended, then that would be reported to the police. And there should be a statistic then that a gun was used in self-defense. I don't know where those statistics are, whether there's even provision. Is there a column which says that gun used in self-defense, legal gun? I don't know. Of course, it may be possible that in that 21 to 19, 18 minutes, that a gun may have saved the life of somebody. I don't have an argument with that, and I don't have any statistics to argue with you on that. I think jumping onto the bandwagon is just a natural human reaction. And in the case of my unfortunate cousin who was killed in an overpark, I don't think, we do it every day. We open the newspaper and we see on page 3 and page 4 and page 5, people get killed with firearms, with knives, with pangas, in motor accident, through drunken driving. We see it every day, and we've become quite immune to it. We only react when we see it's a person that we know, and whether it's a famous person like Colin Shabani the other day. Then immediately there's a focus on the way people are driving on the roads and so on. It's quite a natural reaction. It depends on what you want to use it for. If you want to use it for an ulterior purpose or motive, then there's a problem. But if you want to use it for a big cause, I don't see that why you shouldn't jump onto the bandwagon, as it were. Then just lastly, Martin will obviously say that, because thankfully he's not in court against me. It's not an emotional response. How can it be an emotional response when the figure or the statistic that Adele has been putting forward the whole day, where 35 people are being killed daily by the use of firearms? We don't know whether it's legal or illegal. That's not an emotional response. It's based on what is actually happening. The fact is Senzo was actually shot and killed. The fact the nation was actually robbed of his best goalkeeper. The fact is that our nation was maybe even robbed of AFCON if he had played. And that informs SAFA in taking this campaign forward. But having said that, Chairperson MC, we are here. The campaign is and we're quite happy to cooperate with the Portfolio Committee, with SEPS. I think I've had the privilege of acting for them. I am very, very aware of the challenges and the problems that they face in the police, and I'm very mindful of that whatever criticism I've made on behalf of SAFA today. Thank you.
Okay, just 2 points. The one around back to data and to Clem Daniel. I mean, I think one of the things is we're sitting with good data, and we know there's a lot of data. For example, CFR records age, location, gender, about firearm owners. That data sits there, but it's never released publicly. So we don't know, a mapping of who's owning what gun for which purpose. I mean, that's the basic Zimmering standard. If you understand that, you can then begin to know where are the problems. If sports shooting is not the problem, you leave it alone. It might become a problem 10 years later, like the cap and ball thing, which gun owners used as a loophole. But the point is you deal with the data to tell you where's the problem. And unfortunately, the issue around loss and theft is that over the last 4 or 5 years, when Gunfrey's been working really a lot on looking at loss and theft, from about 2010 looking at SAPstats, and then the 2011 affidavit of the minister in the AfriForum Tau case, and then looking at SAP's annual reports and looking at CFR data, there are huge discrepancies. And we need to understand why. There might be some reason for it, but at the moment we're sitting with 3 or 4 different data sources. So for example, you see it in the NIMS. The mortuary data is often different to SAP's data. And there's generally a sense that the mortuary data is more accurate because you're talking about a real body that's sitting in the mortuary. It's not moving from jurisdiction or data being shifted on different years. So I think we've got a lot of that information, but I think we don't have enough of it. And again, we don't have enough of it being public. So for example, another example would be from 2000, SAPs no longer disaggregate firearm homicides in relation to overall homicides. And that's a real problem. So we don't know, other than UNODC got that data from them. But those of us working in the country on this issue, we don't have access to that data. Just one last point on amnesties. And Mr. Maki, we can talk more in detail. I've got a lot of information on the Brazil example. But I guess the issue for all of us to think about is we took 100,000 guns off the street in 2005. Who wouldn't want to support that? Out of circulation. So the potential for loss and theft is reduced by 100,000 weapons. Surely all of us want to support those guns moving out of circulation, removing them from the potential for suicide, accident, intimate partner violence in the home, or the potential for theft. So we have to be thinking, what do we want to do? And in my understanding of removing weapons from circulation, that's a huge success. The question you raise about incentives for criminals, mostly in Latin America, there have been some interesting experiments with not just cash, but things like sort of communities getting a health clinic, depending on how many guns they hand in, etc. And there are problems with that. So there are problems around incentives, and we need to grapple with it. So we need to look at what do other countries tell us about what works, and then what is appropriate and relevant for our context. But definitely, amnesties have an impact. They have some problems and some challenges, but they have an impact, and we should seriously explore that as one mechanism in South Africa to remove guns from circulation.
Wow.
Just one law. I think
there was the stadium issue, which was the last
stadium issue. I will have to ask Dr. Chodana, that was dealt with during the 2010 World Cup, because FNB was obviously one of the venues that was used. But Martin just reminds me that, in fact, what happens if you go to any of our stadia, whether it's a cricket stadium or rugby or soccer, you are routinely asked by the security whether you have a firearm. And if you do, I've seen them, they have a way, they keep it, they store it, or whatever. But I think the point that we're making, it should just at the outset, you shouldn't even be anywhere near a stadium with a gun. It should be like we have now quite become used to non-smoking zones and so on. You just shouldn't come there and say, oh, yes, I declare my cigarettes. You shouldn't just come there at all with your gun or your whatever. Thank you, ma'am.
We've had a long day. I think you all will agree. I think it's wise for me to attempt a 3-minute summary, tell you where we've been, thank the various panelists and speakers that's been here, give them a little token of our appreciation, and then send all of you on your way after a thank you and a closure from the Honourable Björkman. Please gather outside and have some tea. And then you're still in time to miss the traffic if you leave at 4:30, I think. Unless the traffic is already out there.
No, Capetonians leave their office at 3.
Okay, so apparently they also come in at 7, but nothing as far as I know opens at 7, so, you know, I don't know what they're doing inside at 7. So where have we been? Well, we started off with Guy Lamb trying to suggest and talk about the various controls and to look at the state of the SADC region and South Africa within the SADC region. Tomorrow, a lot of that discussion will get a lot more specific around South Africa, the South African police, the private security industry, and efforts to control firearms through legislation. A lot of what actually was raised today, either as comment or question, will likely to be raised as questions to comment tomorrow. And it may be remiss on my part to not speak to the speakers beforehand to make sure that they're aware of what happened today if they're not, so that they can more accurately speak to some of the issues that emerged. So we had Guy speak about those controls and how we rate as South Africa. A lot of us took heart from what was said by about the role of the Civilian Secretariat. And I think folks are looking to the Civilian Secretariat to say, hold on, you're an essential government department and we look to you for information. We look to you to fulfill your mandate on research, on policy review, to start looking at issues and loopholes and snags with implementation. Because capacity, capability, the ability to do it, not just the people to do it or the budget to do it, but actually the ability to do it. And to implement what a lot of us already see as being world-class legislation effectively and meaningfully seems to be outstanding. And we're looking towards the Secretariat as an important hub, an institution of state to ensure that policy is implemented properly, that meaningful and targeted research is undertaken, and that the police in its operations are supported. And that out of that, the rest of us can actually have a meaningful and informed conversation. The impact of gun violence on our communities and our society, we took heart with that. Because I think during the course of the conversation, we tended to lose this thing that it's actually not about whether a gun is legal or illegal, but it's actually the impact of that particular violence or the use of that gun on either the victim, his or her society, the community, and those around them, that there is that impact. That gun violence, however and by whomever and however perpetrated, and by whatever the nature of the weapon, actually has a significant impact. And a lot of us felt that. We felt it in that presentation, where it was brought to heart. And it's not enough to say that our societies are terrorized and highly traumatized. That we will use violence to settle disputes, and with dealing with feeling disempowered, and yet that in itself is something we have to address. Now, many of us may take issue with the fact that it's not poverty that causes violence, and I, in my own work, will prove that. That is not about data sets, not about your economic income. So there's a lot of debate and a lot of dialogue for us to have so that we can actually begin to listen to each other and learn from one another, because we all seem to be in accord that this is a complex, nuanced issue, and at times we spoke at almost different levels to each other. Some of us were concerned with the victim and the impact on the society, because that's the nature of our brief. Others spoke from my constituency. Others spoke from my interest. And that's all good. Yet what we want to encourage going forward in this process as we go towards the Firearms Amendment and other pieces of legislation and policy like the White Paper on Safety Security is an actual dialogue where we can begin, as you've said today, to say, I find accord with this. Data is lacking, and quality data in particular. We need some research. Yes, it is nuanced and complex, and sometimes we need to listen to each other. And I want to commend you for that and for having the patience to actually do so. There is a role for the private security industry. There are legislation in place that already seems to control law-abiding gun owners. And of course, law-abiding gun owners will talk from that perspective. And yet today we didn't have this thing where it seemed to be anti this and for this. And again, I want to commend the House on that. We really tried to speak from where we came, and that's important going forward. We need joined-up solutions. We need to harmonize our efforts as much as we need to harmonize legislation. This idea of understanding how everybody contributes in his or her own way by being a responsible gun owner, by being a lobbyist and an activist, by being a community member, by being a law-abiding citizen, we all contribute to a society in which we can feel safe and free of fear. And that's important, that we can all be responsible citizens, and that effectively is what it's about. It's not only about crime. So as we go into tomorrow, I invite you to think about the various contributions that each of these different speakers are going to make, and we hope to have the Minister and the Deputy Minister here tomorrow. Come as you came today with your targeted questions. Hold them to account, because holding each other to account was a large part of today. That we are responsible and we should be holding each other account. And you will look into the Portfolio Committee and the Ministry and others to hold key institutions to account. So as we end today, we just want to call on the Honourable Bjerkman to say thank you formally to all of you, to say thank you to our panelists and to our speakers who are still around. We got a little bit of a gift for you. See, it helps to be up here, no? And then we have tea for the rest of you. So once again, thank you, and thank you to our panel. If you would just sit here for a second, we want to thank you formally for that. Oh, hold on. Finally, please, these, bring them. It helps the security officers when you enter, just to show that you're already registered, and they're likely just to scan you and let you through. Is that okay? Don't have to go through that whole process, so we encourage you not to forget this in your hotel rooms or elsewhere. So please bring your tags for tomorrow. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you to our facilitator, Elder de Klerk, for his hard work today. Tomorrow we'll be also doing the same task, so good luck with that. I think it's well done. Adele and Martin sitting here for more than an hour together. Well done. Maybe the good advocate was instrumental in keeping them apart. Thank you for that as well. Yes, thank you very much from the Portfolio Committee side for all the contributions today. I think valuable input from all sides. There's also other speakers that hopefully will also contribute tomorrow. I think issues was flagged that we really have to look at during this whole process going forward, but thank you very much for coming. Tomorrow we will have the Minister, the Deputy Minister, as well as the National Commissioner, and also the Secretariat again. So thank you very much, and please use the opportunity again to speak to the members of the committee, Honourable Mulabatsi, Honourable Mula, Honourable Kola Barnard, yes, Honourable next to her, yes, Honourable Marke, all the members that are here, Honourable Mbele, because at the end of the day, June, July, they're going to play a huge role in terms of the legislation as well. So please use the opportunity during tea time also to interact with the various colleagues. Also, of course, the private security industry tomorrow. We're also looking forward to your input, also very important. So thank you very much for attending today, and have a nice evening. Thank you.